here is the code for our project. We did start off using the VR template and modified it and built off of it. I guess starting from the top, we are in VR Pawn. So first off, event begin play, everything's the same, except we create a sound, which is our metronome. We save it so we can reference it later. We call start level. So start level is basically checking to see if the audio is currently playing. And if it is, we'll stop it and then play it again. And if it is not, we will start playing it. The reason for this is so this function can be called to whenever the user presses replay audio. So hopefully the audio is lined up with the metronome. Then there is a short delay before we call a dispatcher to play the pre-made audio. Pre-made audio is stored on each level, which is right up here. This first one is kind of lengthy, just because I think it has the most notes out of all of them. But this is playing the sound, and then whatever the delay needs to be, playing the sound, delay. And each level that has a pre-made audio, one of these can be found. If there isn't a pre-made audio, the dispatcher just isn't bound to anything and it won't do anything. So it won't play some random audio. Another thing we added on to is the menu. So one thing we kept is the reset orientation. So when the user puts on the headset, in case they put it on and then back up, they can click this button and they will reset to the original position. Show stats is something we created. The code for the stats menu is basically the exact same as the regular menu that is displayed, but the interface is different. The next level is just a placeholder, but each of these have a getter that accesses a time variable in the game instance, which we'll talk about in just 1 minute. Next is replay audio. This will call the replay audio function. There is also the next level button, which it calls the next level function on VR Pawn, which this is just a dispatcher that will call next level, and the next level reference is also stored on the level. So level 1 has the reference to level 2, and level 2 has the reference to level 3, so on and so forth. I believe that's it for the menu. Yep. Another thing we modified is on the player hand model, we added collision boxes. Sorry, I'm not too sure why it's moving so slow, but we added hitboxes to the palms. The reason for this is that the drums also have a hitbox. So if the user overlaps their hand with this hitbox, it'll register an event, which we'll talk about in just 1 second. The next component to talk about is the control. The control has a couple of things going on. In the viewport, you can't see anything, but there are these 2 static meshes, which just represent a checkbox, but they aren't currently visible. The reason why is that they will become visible once the user completes the level. But the control is an actor on each level, and it's instance editable, so on each level it holds different values in its arrays. So this array represents the hits, so something we did is that we made the red drum true and the blue drum false. So when we're looking at this step sequence, this represents false, false, true, false, 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 true, false. And the array matches that. And then the second array represents the time in between each hit, or I guess what time each hit is supposed to be. So at 0 seconds, the first hit, that will be blue. The second hit will be a quarter of a second after, and it will also be blue. Third one is half a second into it, and it will be true, the red drum, so on and so forth. And we also have this size variable, which is just a little easy way to see how many array elements are on each level. Going back to the control, we get the time and set that so that we can see how long a user was in each level. So right at the very beginning of the level, it'll start the counter and then set that variable so we can use it later. Then we cast the VR pawn and pass all of these variables into we'll pass all these variables previously mentioned to the VR pawn so that we can use it for a checking algorithm. Time length was something we were going to implement but didn't. Time length just represents how long each rhythm is supposed to be. In this sense, all the rhythms were roughly the same length, so we just used the same variable throughout. But this represents the rhythm should be roughly I believe 1.8 seconds. So if the user takes too long, it'll let us know and that'll reset the counter, which again, we'll talk about in just 1 minute. We also bind a event to discheck, which basically is when the level is completed, this event will be called, which will make the check mark visible. It will cast to our game instance, which our game instance is holding the array, holding all of the times for each level. So 0 represents how long they were on level 1, 1 represents how long they were on level 2, so on and so forth, and I represents what level they are currently on. Going back, we take the time at the beginning of the level, get the current time, subtract them, and insert it into the array at I. And then we also increment I to let the instance know that they've moved on to the next level next time we call this. This is the code for each drum. Well, this is just for one drum, but both drums are identical. There's just a couple of things that are different. So whenever the user overlaps their hand, it'll play the sound of the drum. We'll cast the VR pawn, and then we will call the algorithm to check the hit. And then with the drum either being true or false, depending on which drum they're hitting. So this one is true, the other one is false. And then we also send in the time it was hit. Finally, getting into the algorithm, it does look very messy. Didn't take too much time making it look pretty. However, we'll go through it step by step. So these three if statements or branches are somewhat edge cases. So this conditional is checking to see if the level has been completed or not. We don't really want the users to be generating more data after they've already completed the level, just in case they were to complete the rhythm twice. That would probably add on to the game instance, and we don't want that. So that's why this is here. The second conditional is for the intro level. So in the intro level, the control variable, the size is set to 0, or I guess it's set to 0 by default. There isn't a control variable. So it checks to see if that size is equal to 0, signifying that they are on the intro level where there isn't a rhythm to be played. So if that's the case, it just won't check anything. This branch is checking to see if start time is equal to 0, which basically means that it was undeclared yet. Start time represents what time the first drum was hit so that we can use it for calculations later. So after they've hit the drum for the first time, we'll check to make sure that start time is set. and then we'll set the variable, and that's what that conditional is for. This next conditional is basically if the time between they started and this current hit is longer than the time length variable, it will cause a wipe, which just clears the slate. So it sets I to 0, which I will make more sense in a minute, and the start time to the current time. And then that way they can continue on into this conditional right here. Now we are in the checking process to see if the user is playing the rhythm correctly. So going back to those arrays, if the user first hits the drum, and for example, the first element in the array is false, we check to make sure that they hit the correct drum by getting that variable in the array and checking to see which drum they hit. That's the first part of this conditional. Second one is where it gets a little more messy. I like to look at this part first. This is getting the control time from the array, so the proper time the beat is supposed to be hit. Then we subtract and add a forgiveness variable. The forgiveness variable is just there since most of the people we tested aren't musicians, so they aren't going to be perfect with their hits. We were pretty generous by giving them a 0.2 second window above or below the desired time. We add and subtract that to the variable, and then we check to see, or keep that in mind. Then we get the time the drum was hit minus the start time, and then that's what we're comparing it to. So we're making sure that this, I'm having a little bit of a hard time describing what exactly this is doing, but we are making sure that the time is within a certain window. So essentially like that. Hopefully that describes it a little bit better than I can. So it checks to make sure that the beat is right and the time they hit it is somewhat right. That's what this conditional is. If it's not, we will wipe it since that was an error so that they can continue on trying to get the rhythm correct. If it is true, we increment I by 1, so that means we're looking at the next element in the array. I is just representing which element of the control time and control hit arrays we'll be grabbing from. Next, we're checking to see if I is equal to the size, signifying that they have correctly played the rhythm and that they're done. Then we call level complete, which is just a function that sets a Boolean to true. And then this is the dispatcher on the control variable so that it'll set the visibility and set the timing in the game instance. And then we'll just wipe it again. And I believe that is it. A couple of things that differ from level to level that wasn't shown off is that this pre-made rhythm is different on each level. The pre-made audio differs from level to level, so this whole sequence would look different on a different level, as well as the control will look different on each level as well. But I believe that is it. Thank you. All right. So here is kind of the rundown of how we ran our experiment. So we would let the users put the headset on and get comfortable with the environment so they can play around with the drums. They can also find the menu button to see the options. They can see next level, replay audio, reset orientation, stuff that was already said earlier in the video. I'll kind of just run through this as fast as I can. So here's, yep, so that was the pre-made audio playing. So you can't just like brute force it, like you can't just do it. like you have to play it somewhat close to the rhythm. So I'm gonna wait just a second so it can reset. There we go. And then that's the control variable, or control actor, I should say, popping up, letting me know I'm done. Here is a sheet music level. So this is just a pre-made audio level. So the screen is blank, so they just have to rely on the replay audio. And then after that final audio level, it is only sheet music or only step sequence. And then this is the final step sequence. And this one is just step sequence, no audio. Alright, and then once they've completed the final level, what we did is we asked them to click on show stats. We either let them just sit here and show us the numbers, or we would have them take the headset off and then we would put it on and one of us would record the numbers after.